Hey everyone, I'm Brian Belfour. I'm the VP of Growth at HubSpot. I'm here doing a guest interview with Collis, who's the CEO of Envato. Welcome. How are you doing today, Collis?
Thanks. Yeah, pretty good. It's pretty early over here in Melbourne,
That's
but good
that,
time to chat.
that's right. You guys are all in Australia, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Right down in the south, southernmost tip. There's Tasmania just below us, and then the Arctic.
Great. Well, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about Envato? I have a feeling people haven't heard of that company name, but I guarantee they probably ended up on one of your products or sites if they've looked about anything about design or development.
Yeah, that's right. So we run a bit of we think of it as an ecosystem, a set of sites where if you need to build a website or do some marketing, our sites will help you accomplish these goals. And we do them in a few different ways. So if you wanted to learn how to make a website or learn how to design, we have the Tuts Plus network and tutorials, video courses, all kinds of stuff. If you wanted to hire someone to do one of those things, we run Envato Studio where you can hire freelancers to design logos or make videos. And if you're somewhere in the middle, a bit DIY, but not quite like learning from scratch, we run Envato Market, which is our largest set of marketplaces. It includes ThemeForest, Video Hive, and a bunch of others. And you can buy WordPress themes, After Effects templates, music, photos, the lot.
Great. And so, give us a little history about the company. Like, when did you guys start? You know, how fast approximately have you grown since then, and kind of like where you guys are at today?
Yeah, absolutely. So we started in 2006. There was three of us, three co-founders, me, my wife, and my best friend. Later, we got my brother to join. We completely bootstrapped. So we kind of did it off savings and credit cards and whatnot. And back in 2006, the first thing we launched was Flashden, which was a marketplace for Flash.
Mm,
Stock Flash, and that back then that was kind of awesome. These days, it's like 1/50th the size it was at its peak. It was has a real like
yeah.
go up and straight back down once Steve Jobs and the iPhone and HTML5 and all that sort of stuff happened. But back in 2006, Flash was still kind of cool. I'd been selling Flash elsewhere. We launched a Flash marketplace. And we launched August 2006. By like December, on day one, it was $10. Day one was a $10 sale,
That's great.
which actually, in retrospect, I'm like, that's good value, really, on day one. But at the time, I was so disappointed. I think, as an entrepreneur, you sometimes get into your head that when I launch this thing, just buckets of money will flow in and users but instead it was a $10 sale. By like December, we were $1,000 a week of sales happening, so that was pretty good. And then in 2007, we grew maybe 20-fold. The following year, it was five-fold, and then four-fold, and it kind of dropped off, though we're still growing pretty quick. And these days, one of the metrics we give out is how much money we've paid out to all the contributors on the sites. And we've just recently, like a month ago, passed 200 million that's been paid all time to freelancers, designers, developers using the sites.
And is that total or is that in the last year?
Total, yeah,
That's total.
total.
Um, cool. And so, have you guys kept the company bootstrapped the entire time?
Yes, so still proudly bootstrapped, still no investors, don't know anything about venture capital or any of those topics. I know lots about like doing stuff on a shoestring um, and living with your in-laws, if that's
Sure. I mean, so in the context of growth, because I'm sure there's a lot of entrepreneurs watching and kind of facing, similar decision about should I raise money, should I not? But in the context of the subject of growth, have you guys ever felt like bootstrapping the company has held you back on the growth side, or maybe limited your growth? And if
Mm.
so, why did you? Why did you decide to like stay bootstrapped and kind of not try to go faster?
Yeah. Look, I think it's been. I've never felt that we were held back by it. I think because the trajectory of me understanding business kind of matches Invado's growth. So I feel like if we'd had more money, I probably just would have screwed it up a bit more. I'm going to spend it in the wrong places or whatever.
Hmm.
In a way, it's like I'm a big fan of having constraints on things, and having no money in the early years meant that we were much more careful with ad spends, much more, with thought, think through things, a lot more innovative. So we didn't really have much money for advertising, so we spent a lot of our time for just trying out different types of growth activities. We experimented a lot in those first couple of years, tried just all sorts of different stuff because we were running a Flash marketplace, our most successful thing that we ever did in 2006, and the thing that got us from $10 to $1,000 a week was actually not ads and not any of the things that probably would work for anyone else, but for us, we wanted to appeal to other Flash makers, and there was lots of these Flash design galleries back then. So we custom built a showroom, we called it, out of stuff we were selling, and we just submitted to all these galleries, and it got picked up, and it didn't cost us any dollars because I was a Flash guy. I just made it myself. And that was actually way more successful than the ads we'd bought or the anything I think we might have spent money on.
Yeah. So let me make sure I understand this. So like, you would create basically these Flash assets yourself, and there were all these sites that had like galleries of different Flash assets out there. You put them on those galleries, and I'm sure there was like some kind of link back or something back to Flash Den.
Yeah, basically. So our marketplace, it's actually assets sold by many different people. So that today there's like 30,000 people selling stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the assets, individual assets, were made by other people, and I wanted to show what you could do, like the power of the stuff we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So we created a site out of just assets from our marketplace, and they're still around these days. There's lots of design galleries you can submit a site design to. Even today, they get a reasonable amount of traffic. But because we were targeting that literal demographic of people who go to design galleries, when we submitted a Flash showroom built entirely out of stock assets, it was a good draw card. And as I say, it was free. I mean, the lesson is not particularly useful for most other businesses unless you happen to also be making something in the design space. Sure. But I think for me, it's much more about the fact that it wasn't a thing that cost money. It was much more about just thinking through, well, who buys this stuff? Where do those people go? How can we get in front of them? And in this case, it was like, well, why don't we try building a showroom?
Yeah. I mean, I think the other important lesson there, I mean, I get questions all the time from people trying to build communities or two-sided marketplaces, right? And they always face this chicken or the egg problem.
Yes.
And I think, I typically my response is you got to do one of two things, and in either one you've got to like manually force one side of the market, like do the work yourself, which is kind of sounds like the path that you took, right? You kind of just really just doing it yourself. Or the second thing is, you build some product that is only interesting to one side of the market that provides some sort of value to them without them needing the other side of the market, and you kind of get it going that way. And I'm trying to, and of course now I'm blanking of examples of people who have done that before. But
yeah, I think definitely you're right. You need to kind of jumpstart. It's like that. It's like a circle. I often think, you need the thing to sell and the sellers, and you need the buyers, and they're kind of dependent on each other. And you need to jumpstart one or both. And we kind of tried to jumpstart both, actually. So the content, before we'd even launched the marketplace, we went out and commissioned content and made it look like it was from an individual seller, but we'd actually paid this person, hey, can you make this stuff? Can you put it there? And then the first buyer was an actual buyer, but in those first months, and even actually for a few years when we would start new categories, I would often go and buy things. And just make the seller feel like, oh, hey, I'm getting sales. They'd start making more stuff. Your library would get bigger. that kind of helps. The other thing that we did to stimulate purchases was that we did like a credit giveaway. So the marketplaces work on credit. And at the time that we launched, we used to actually take a very substantial portion, something like 75% of every sale. We would take, and the seller would make 25%. These days,
Wow.
that has almost flipped over. But back then, it meant that giving away money didn't cost as much because we would end up taking a big part of that back. And so around the same time that we did the showroom, we also did a $10,000 of credit giveaway, which cost us $2,000, but it meant that it was basically a way to get buyers to actually use the system and to pay the sellers, who then made more content and kind of got that loop going.
Yeah.
But that, as you say, that chicken and egg problem is the problem with marketplaces.
Yeah, but it sounds like not only did you sort of manually jumpstart kind of the supply or the inventory of the assets, but you even manually, basically forced the feedback loops when you did get like somebody in there and they did list something to make them feel good and get them to come back, right? Like you bought their stuff, or and kind of manually force that kind of stuff, which seems really smart as well.
Yeah, I mean, like I feel a little like, oh, maybe that's slightly artificial sounding now in retrospect. But I think I'd been a seller elsewhere before, and I knew that the power of seeing a sale. When you list something on eBay or whatever, and you like sell your first thing, you're like, holy smokes!
Yeah.
It's a gold mine.
Yeah.
I'm gonna make way more stuff. And for us, I think I'm a believer in sort of growth engines, getting like a certain set of things that works together going. And for us, a big piece of it was SEO, and the SEO came from you've got thousands of people making thousands of files. They make a title, a description. They basically produce a targeted page about whatever. Back in the Flash days, it would be like XML site templates. Mm-hmm. And they will often, those guys would be kind of optimizing their pages naturally because they're all kind of entrepreneurial people selling on a marketplace. So the more content we had, the more likelihood we had of being found, which led to the buyers, and that became a virtuous loop. Later, we threw in an affiliate program, which helped a lot. And because in the early days we had such a big margin, we made the affiliate program something like 50% of the first sale. Eventually it dropped down to 30%, but that has been today as well. It's still a big growth driver. We pay a couple $1 million a year out in affiliate referrals.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it sounds like SEO has been a big part of your growth engine. What else would you sort of label as like big or key important pieces of that engine?
Yeah, sure. So I think definitely the SEO and affiliates, I think, were probably the two biggest pieces of growing the market. The other one, I think, is a bit more soft, but around branding. So we, and it was almost unintentional in 2007. So about a year after we'd launched the first marketplace, I just kind of got into blogging a little bit, and on the side started a blog about freelancing called Freelance Switch, which became quite popular. Back then, it used to hit the Dig homepage. Dig used to have a homepage which had stuff. These days, it's become a kind of curated magazine.
What's Dig? That sounds like ancient or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, those were the days. I always remember being like Reddit. Reddit was like the also ran.
Sure.
But yeah, Freelance Switch then led me to starting Tuts, where I started publishing Photoshop tutorials, and that actually became, for quite a long time, all of our traffic, our biggest traffic was on the blogs, and our biggest revenue was in the marketplaces, and we sort of unintentionally, I think, built up a bit of brand through these sort of free educational sites, and we would funnel traffic back into the market. So we would periodically advertise, and we had our own audience, a captive audience, and did all kinds of stuff. So we would, when we launched Theme Forest years later.
Yeah.
Not that many years later, 2008, we launched Theme Forest, which is WordPress themes, and we ran Web Design Week on PSD Tuts. And you have to remember at that time, PSD Tuts was already quite substantial. I can't remember what the traffic numbers would have been at that time. I think maybe 4 or 5 million page views a month. So it was quite big, and it was similar demographic, and every day we would basically have advertorial during that week and funneling people back. Of course, the blogs lost money, generally speaking. They were a bit of a money and time sink. I used to just write a lot of content myself, so that kind of helped.
Yeah. So you had, it sounds like these blogs they were separate properties from Steam Forest and stuff. Why did you not do like that blogging and what everybody would probably now call content marketing on the marketplaces themselves?
Yeah, didn't occur to me. Actually, this is the short answer, but I actually think it was maybe a stronger thing in the sense that people grew to be fans of those brands, and just sort of over time realized these brands are affiliated with these other ones. I don't know that. I don't believe that a blog, which is under a big product name, has as much chance of getting traction. So for example, we have a market blog, and at times we've put the same sort of editorial standards in there. Never quite gets the same sort of pickup. I think because we end up putting stuff which is a bit more transactional, like, we have a product announcement or some other stuff. Whereas with Freelance Switch or Tuts, it was literally just about freelancing or Photoshop or web development. We would get the most, we get very high standard, very professional writers who wanted to be affiliated with a strong audience. And I think it kind of built up off its own steam. I'm sure it's doable. I'm sure you could build a blog really big. Like the Airbnb blog could be huge, I guess. I just don't think it'll ever be as big as a dedicated travel, accommodation, whatever sort of site.
Yeah, interesting. Probably the most common question I get about this content marketing is like, how do you scale it? Because it sounds like you started out by writing a lot of the content yourself. I imagine that didn't work forever.
No. So very quickly we brought in an editor.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So each of our, we grew at one point to 15 different blogs with 15 editors, 15 writing teams.
Wait, 15 different blogs, 15 different sites.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. So I think our editorial actually. We even had App Store, which we later closed. So close to 20. So our publishing, I think, maybe went beyond what a typical growth person would be thinking about in terms of, because we didn't see them as a growth engine. They were just another product of Envato. They run advertising. Tuts Plus these days, sells premium content and is a multi-million-dollar business all on its own. But yes, so they had each site would have an editor. The editor would then have not a staffed writing team, but hire regular writers and then just occasional guest writers, and they were run as commercial blogs.
Yeah, interesting. So you had an editor for each blog. Was most of the content contributions from other people, and that editor was mostly managing those contributors, or did you also have internal content creators, or how did that work?
It was almost exclusively external contributors. Often the editor would be a bit of a writer themselves, and they would periodically add content. So if I think about Freelance Switch, because that was our very first blog, in essence, I was the first editor, and Cyan and myself would write the content. We quickly brought on a couple of freelance writers, including one who went on to, if you've ever seen the blog Zen Habits, which is quite a substantial blog, Leo Babush. He was one of our early writers. We hired a couple of writers like Leo who would just produce stuff about productivity or freelancing. And then, as you say, it quickly became slightly unsustainable. Don't get me wrong, I actually like working a lot for a while. I just was like, more work to do. But after a while, even for me, it was like, this is just way too out of control. And so we brought on an editor there who then would manage those writers. And we had a little submission box on the side. We would pay $150 to anything we published, so we would just start getting random submissions, and if we saw a couple of good submissions, we'd turn that person into a regular writer.
Interesting.
Did the same formula for Tuts, and then later for App Storm, which was all about Mac apps and things.
Yeah, so So it sounds like you guys at one point had like 20 different blogs. Where have you guys scaled that back down, or like where
Yeah.
kind of is that technique at now?
Yeah, right. We've merged Freelance Switch into Tuts. So Tuts was always the biggest set of blogs, and it was all about teaching. We published free tutorials. Eventually, we like for educational content, a blog format. I don't know if it's actually that great because a lot of stuff gets buried. And eventually, we moved to what Tuts is now, which is a bit more of a platform driven by search. And we merged all the Freelance Switch content into a sort of business channel. We got off WordPress eventually because we hadn't built it in a very optimal way for WordPress because it was from 2007. So there was 15 WordPress instances, and we moved to a single Ruby CMS instance. We closed AppStorm down, so we had this network of blogs about app reviews and things. And the reason we started at the time was this is back before the Mac App Store, and I was like, what other marketplaces could we make? What if we made a marketplace for Mac apps?
Yeah.
And so my thinking at that time was first thing to do is to build the audience. So we built AppStorm and launched a blog, got an editor, started reviewing apps. It grew quite big to about 3 million visits a month, and we scaled it out to web, iPhone, iPad, etc. But eventually, along the way, the Mac App Store launched. We never managed to figure out a way to actually monetize AppStorm, and so January, I think, we just closed it down.
Interesting. So what? So going back to like that question about kind of that growth engine. So SEO was a big piece. I mean, you were getting all of these content submissions, right, and tutorials and stuff like that. That makes total sense. Sounds like this kind of blogging or content marketing strategy was sort of a key piece. What else? Anything else that kind of you saw as like the key piece of that engine?
I think those are probably the main key items. In the first few years, we did a lot of campaigns, though, as well. And this has become less of a thing now, though. As we've gotten bigger, it's harder to let me explain what I mean by campaigns, actually.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Yeah,
we would I guess come up with so I mentioned this showroom idea that we had, and it took a week to build this showroom, and then we just submitted it all over the place, and that got a few thousand visits in, and at that time that was a big deal. Later we would occasionally we would do this cross-posting thing with the Tuts network, where for a week we would do roundups of interesting items and just publish them to the audience, and that would make a big spike all of a sudden. We did just all kinds of weird stuff. Some of it was a total flop. Like we made a wallpaper competition and gallery for an audio marketplace. I don't know why. It didn't work. It took me 2 weeks. Got a little bit of traffic in, but not much. So we would just do a lot of ideas, let's make this super in-depth content for free on the market blog, or let's try to get we did Stumble Upon campaigns. I don't know if you remember Stumble Upon.
Yeah.
They're still around, I think, but back then you could buy traffic really cheaply.
Yeah, they jacked up the prices quite a bit.
Oh, did they?
Oh yeah. You used to be able to get
heaps,
for
right?
for a couple cents, a few cents, and now it's minimum 25, 30 cents. It doesn't even make sense anymore.
Wow. I mean, even a few cents, it sometimes didn't really make a lot of sense.
Sure.
The traffic was often very transitory. But yeah, so we would do lots of campaigns, and I just had this mindset that especially as we were still trying to figure out our growth engine, that it was important we tried everything, just sort of measured the results from each thing. So, whether it was just we visited every Flash forum and would chat to people. That was, got a few people in, not very scalable.
Yeah.
Tried networking with bloggers. That was a bit more effective, not as effective as the fact that on the side we'd launched our own blog, so we'd start focusing more on that. We started doing different types of competitions, trying to experiment with those. So none of them became one of the big key things I think we did, but especially for years 1, 2, and 3, I'd say, the aggregate of doing many, many small campaigns, trying out bundles and discounts and whatever, I think kind of brought in overall a fair dose of traffic. And And I think because that growth engine relied on a kickstart, that was helpful. We had to somehow get content to get SEO started and get affiliates started and whatnot.
Yeah, interesting. So what do you, where do you see kind of the promising areas for growth today? Is it still really focused on those new areas? Are you guys looking at other new opportunities? Kind of how do you look at kind of the present and sort of the new in the future?
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think the size of it now, I find myself thinking more about new content types. So maybe 2 years ago, we started pushing into what we call media content, so photos, footage, music. We traditionally had come from website templates, After Effects templates, graphics, print templates, so a bit more the stuff that might have media items inside of it. So you build a website, it might have photos. We've kind of slowly over time been moving into what are actually much broader, bigger categories, but a lot more competitive. So I've been thinking a lot about how do you enter that sort of market where there's Getty and Shutterstock and some really substantial companies out there with huge libraries. How do we leverage our audience? So that's, I think, one big space. The other space that I often find myself thinking about is how do we get the things, like most of our, especially in Envato Market, which is our key product, is targeted at freelancers, marketers, people who kind of know what they're doing. I always think of it as from like sort of DIY regular person through to professionals.
Yeah.
But my mum would have trouble with a WordPress theme.
Yeah.
It's not that simple. I mean, it's better than what used to be before WordPress, but it still takes a bit of complexity. So I often think about how do we take what we currently have and reach what is obviously a much more substantial audience of everybody. If we've got that sort of professional segment, what else can we sell to that segment, and then how do we grow the segment to a larger one? I think are the two sort of key things, and they're a bit of a balance. Yeah.
So it sounds like you guys have kind of figured out this recipe, this growth engine that combines kind of SEO, affiliate, some of this content marketing among certain types of marketplaces, and you've kind of taken that engine and gone from Flash to theme forest to like new sort of categories or assets, and have been growing kind of the company that way, and you kind of see opportunities for additional growth for keep expanding that way. How does that compare to like how you think about growth in like taking one of those things like theme forest and going just deeper there, growing like that one thing? Because it seems like your company can grow on both axes, right?
Yeah. So I think our early strategy was to get to the sort of one-stop shop marketplace, and although we're focusing on media at the moment, broadly I think we have the full gamut. Like I often sit around trying to think of what other new content things do we not sell, and in this specific space of sort of creative marketing, design development.
Sorry, excuse me. Sorry.
In this space where I think we're mostly maxed out, we sell most things that type of audience would want. I think we could do a better job of some of them, and so our focus in the market team at the moment. Bless you in advance.
Sorry. Bad timing.
At least it didn't get the camera.
Yeah.
Our focus at the moment in Envato is diving deeper in some ways. So we've been working on some of the specific issues for themes like support and stuff that would make theme selling awesome. And same thing for media. I think that makes sense, and to some extent, the diving deeper happens a bit from our content contributors. So even the time that we were busy going horizontal, our contributors saying WordPress themes were going deeper. Like the WordPress themes in 2008 when we started versus the WordPress themes that you can see on Theme First today are just like miles apart. They've really drilled into all the different types of things you could do with a WordPress theme, all the different categories of WordPress themes, add-ons, all kinds of stuff. They're super complex. When we first launched, I always used to think I could make a WordPress theme to sell here. These days, like I got no chance there.
Yeah.
And it's like the reason it happens is that sort of market dynamic. There's like the top theme author has made over $4 million, so they're legitimate businesses in and of themselves.
Wait, so how much have individual makers made?
So the top theme author over 4 million.
Wow.
There's like 15, maybe closer to 20 people who've passed $1 million in sales.
Wow.
So it's pretty substantial, yeah. And you
Sure.
can see that there's a lot of incentive to compete, figure out how to do better, more, pack more value in, which is kind of cool. And so that is a nice side effect of a marketplace dynamic, is you have more locally optimizing points. So each person on the marketplace is trying to be an entrepreneur and optimize their part of the market. And if you're concentrating on the overall market, it's quite a powerful effect.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So when you guys look at optimizing growth, do you guys focus on like a few key metrics, and if so, like what are those metrics, and do they differ from one property to another, or what's kind of your view on kind of analytics and metrics?
Yeah. So I've always believed in having some level of metrics, though I'm generally more of an intuit. So I go a lot more on gut feel while having a general grasp of how things are going. So, like, don't get me wrong, I look at sales and pricing and whatnot more or less daily. Our daily sales broken into categories and the average price we're getting, the total revenue, all those kinds of things I look at more or less every day. I look at traffic less than I used to. In the early years, I looked a lot at traffic, conversion rates, how we were doing from different sources of traffic. So, what was search versus paid ads versus whatnot. These days, most of those channels are owned by somebody. So, the marketing team has an email team in it, and a guy who's in charge of SEO, and another guy who's in charge of the sort of blog content marketing of Invoted Market. And so each of those guys or girls will be thinking about those specific metrics. For me, I tend to focus on revenue still, but at the same time, I'm a big believer in just kind of gut feel. I just think that gut feel comes from lots of experience and in the background, lots of numbers. But that sort of moment of intuition, I think, happens without. Yeah, I don't know. It's like A/B tests, right? I have this feeling like A/B tests will only ever get you to a local maxima, and at some point you need some intuition to jump into something completely different. And sometimes the completely different will be much better. But if your A/B test is mostly going to optimize within a certain space or segment. So I'm sort of a believer in both metrics, but with a bit of space for intuition.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think there's and you kind of see this in the debate on some of the blogs too. I think there's very extremes of thinking, pure quantitative versus pure qualitative. Yeah. It's like is growth about being creative or being a scientist, and it's interesting. I mean, I something I starts with my team is it's neither one or the other. You can get really trapped into some really hard negatives if you go too far in one direction, and it's really about balancing those two things, right? How do you use the data to make informed, smart decisions, but using kind of that qualitative feedback, that intuition, that gut about knowing your customer, knowing your channel to take smart risks and smart chances, and do things that the data is not necessarily going to show you. So
yeah, that's so true. And I think I often think the less time you spend with a product, the more you need the data. So if you haven't had that much exposure to the product in that sort of visceral way, haven't spoken to that many people, haven't had time to get the things that you're going to need for some of the more intuitive leaps, then you need way more data, and you need when we get new people coming into the business, I often feel like I need to stress more prove this thing to me, show me the numbers that back up your assertions. Often there's like details in there. But I think also with data, the other thing that I often think is that it's complete data should be perfect in theory.
Mm-hmm.
However, there's so many ways you can get it wrong.
Oh my God.
Yeah, you can make, even whether it's wrong assumptions, correlation versus causation, or whether you just miss, like sometimes it's as the other day we had this long debate about some metrics and support and some of our operations. Turns out someone along the way had chosen the wrong column. Like, just some random spreadsheet. It wasn't even like an important fail or anything. It was just like, day to day, sometimes you miss something. And I think in those instances, no matter how much data you have, if you don't have that sort of intuition for a second cross-check, like, to just go, well, wait a second, this doesn't actually make sense. Why would buyers want that thing? I think you're prone to making more data-based errors, unless you're, data from Star Trek,
Yeah.
which most of us aren't.
Yeah, I mean, just managing the data and making sure you've got clean, good data to make good analysis. It's a beast in itself.
Yeah.
I remember a few weeks ago at the 500 Startups Growth Conference, I believe it was James Currier from Google Labs, who's done a lot of marketplace stuff, a lot of social games. He's kind of like a master in virality, and he, it was really interesting. He said, like, especially in the early days, half of your engineering effort should go to data. And I was like, wow, like that's, there's not too many people out there. Everybody talks about like really wanting to be able to collect this data and, be data driven or data informed, like whatever your philosophy is. But I found very few people who have actually put the effort and the work into it to really make it happen. And so it was interesting that he came out and actually like gave like a ratio of time. So
that's amazing. So in our early years, we didn't put a lot of time as data. Like we used sort of standard data tools, analytics tools, and whatnot.
Well, I think back in 2006, like things like Mixpanel and stuff didn't even exist, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, Google Analytics was a bit of a novelty even. Like, there's still plenty of people who used its predecessors. And these days it's obviously become a lot more serious. And at Vodo, we've now got a business intelligence team of analysts who help support data-driven, or sometimes just check whether you've. So many people make mistakes with data, and it's actually run by my brother, who's a PhD in physics, and helps a lot in just making sure that you don't give yourself false confidence. You're not like, look, we've looked through the data. This is an awesome plan. As you run off the cliff, but. In those early days, we went a lot more on intuition and just basic data. Like, I think if you don't have a lot of data, it's better to go off of just less clever metrics. So, just more standard visitors, conversions, and whatnot. Because I definitely think you can, unless you're very strong in analytics, in which case ignore everything I'm saying. But if you're like a regular person, I think you can easily fool yourself into things or make mistakes or
Cool. So what if any, like, would you give advice to other people watching this, entrepreneurs, other growth related people, just any general tips, advice on all things related to growth?
Yeah. Look, I only really have one major tip, which is just to try everything. I don't think, and I'm sure, more or less every guest on Growth Hackers probably said this, but I don't think there's a silver bullet. And it really varies depending on what the business is, because we've, over time, kind of grown a few different small businesses. I've ended up experimenting a lot on a few different ones, and they're all quite different. In growing Tuts Plus, which was much more about social media and content marketing, because it was literally content, getting it out. that looks quite different to growing a marketplace, which looks quite different to growing our Envato studio when we're now 6 years in and have a big traffic audience. That's quite a different sort of thing to being bootstrapped with nothing. So I think it is much more about trying many things and measuring to some extent and trying to optimize depending on. I don't think there's a AdWords is the thing for everybody. It's probably a thing for everybody. I think I'm a big believer in investing time in literally sampling every marketing technique you can get your hands on. And these days with the web, there's so much material out there. You can easily write up a list of like 200 things to try. Inbound.org. I always find interesting stuff there to try.
That is a HubSpot product. Just a disclaimer there.
Yes.
That was not a planned plug for those that are watching. Yeah, I mean, it can almost be overwhelming, just given the number of options, and the number of options are like the number of channels out there are increasing. It's that's good on one hand. Bad on the other hand if it's overwhelming. And
it's like you see the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge that recently just swept the world. And
sure.
I sometimes think, if there were charities out there who are like, no, the standard way to, build charity is to do certain types of advertising or whatever, they'd potentially miss out on something that turns out to be the most successful campaign of all time. Back in 2007, we launched this thing called Blog Action Day that ran for a few years, and we would get bloggers around the world on a single day to talk about a single topic. So the first year was the environment, and we had everything from the White House blog to the Google blog, all participating, and that one had a completely different, growth pattern and plan. That was all about getting a few big names on board and using them to leverage other big names, and then using their audiences to leverage other audiences. So like not at all related to the way we did Envato Market. And I think, as I say, you just kind of need to experiment, I think.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, thank you so much for my time. If anybody wants to reach out to you, how should they do that?
Send an email, collis@envato.com. It gets a little overwhelming sometimes, but I usually get back to most things.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for the time. Best of luck on your continued growth path. And I hope everybody learned something today.
Oh, cool. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thanks.